I better look up what Sicario means first.
Sicario.
A hired gunman or assassin, especially in Latin America. What's going on, everyone? Today I'm here on the bench with the newest release from CEN Racing. This is the Sicario, and this is a DL series vehicle which follows the footsteps of the F450s before it. They also had an F250, but unlike the F250 and more like the F450s, this is another dually offering, meaning that you've got two rear tires on each side of that rear axle. Underneath of this old school style body, you're gonna find a lot of similarities to previous F450 models. But what we're gonna do is go through today, cover as much of the detail about what this vehicle has, both what's new and what isn't new, to give you as much information as possible. I believe that I've owned 3 of the F450s and 1 of the F250s before, but they're a different type of RC. They don't fit the mold like the scale crawlers or trail trucks do. It's not really what this is intended for. While you could take this on the trail, possibly, because it is 4-wheel drive, but it does have open front and rear differentials. So you are going to have better maneuverability, but not necessarily better off-road performance because of that. It also has a very long wheelbase, so depending on where you're taking it off-road, you may end up with some snags here and there. So the question of what's the point of these trucks has always existed and, been shouted many times. But I think that where they're best fit is for the people that just love that, custom show truck, road going mainly, call it a bro-dozer. I think that's my favorite word for it in general. While I personally love off-road performance, I totally understand where they're aiming for when they go for a vehicle like this. And I think that's why we've seen such great success of the F450s and 250s over the many years they've been on the market. So them coming out with a new old style version of that, I think makes sense. Now, compared to the previous versions, F450 and F250s, those were all licensed. This one is unlicensed. So you're seeing this branded as the Sicario. No other affiliation specifically to what this may pretty closely resemble. Now, this is a one-piece body, so cab and bed are attached in one big molded part. It does have some nice details though, as far as the front and rear ends of the body go. You do see the molded grille inset, the nice light buckets, and a chrome bumper up there. And this does have functioning lights out of the box. So that's something new, and I think that looks great. The previous versions just had some stickers up there, so you didn't really get that depth and detail that you do with the nice molded look there. Looks pretty decent. The rear, slightly different story. You do have a chrome molded bumper back there, but no LEDs and no additional details other than just the stickers that say CEN Racing. That may initially make you think that that says something different, but it doesn't. CEN Racing, that's all. That's all this is. This has no other affiliation to another motor vehicle company. But beyond that, body is still attached with 4 body clips on the top. It would be nice if CEN went to a clipless or a hidden body system of some sort, being that these vehicles are so just rooted in the looks department. They're made to look good, pull on trailer, driving around, whatever you're doing, you're sitting on your shelf. It'd be nice if we had a little bit of extra detail done with the body mounting to try and accent how these things are, or what these things are best at, and that's looking the way they do. So when you lift that body off, like I said, it does have headlights, so it does have a wire now attached to it there. It's just a JST plug, a servo style JST plug, and that's all that holds it in there. The body does have these foam pads to help protect the paint against the body posts that it rests on. And speaking of the paint, this version, the one that I got, is this deep blue color, and it's hard to tell exactly, but there's a lot of metallic in it. In the light, it's got a great shine. It looks fantastic. And if blue isn't your favorite color, they're also doing a gray version of it as well. So you'll be able to choose between those 2 options when you go to check out. Now, underneath, this is going to be the part that does feel fairly familiar to you. Great big long CEN chassis. These chassis rails are 3 pieces per side, a front, a center, and a rear, on each side of that. This does have sway bars front and rear on the suspension with a panhard in the back. Same that you would have seen previously. The dually tires still mounted to some KG1 style wheels with the Fury tires. That rear axle is so far back from the transmission that it still runs the carrier shaft. So you have a short drive shaft section to a second drive shaft section to make everything work nice and smooth without having your drive shaft have the ability to possibly fall out. It also gives you a little bit of a clearance benefit at the same time. Front, more of a standard setup. You've got a 3-link with panhard front suspension with a standard drive shaft up there. Also has a sway bar up front. The sway bar stuff is another reason why these are not necessarily aimed at off-road. They might help you more for towing type situations with these, as you're not going to be racing them. But towing, if you don't want this thing to kind of prop a tire up while it's trying to do its thing and move forward, then the sway bars are going to be beneficial for that. The transmission here. Now, if you've never had one of these, the transmission is a similar look to many 3-gear transmissions that you've probably seen in the past, but it is actually a 4-gear transmission inside, and it has a little bit of a different benefit compared to most vehicles that may have a similar looking transmission, and that is the fact that there's an intermediate gear in there that has 2 different possible positions. It comes with a little instruction sheet. And this instruction sheet shows you how to open up this transmission and swap that gear into the second position. So you can take it from a factory stock setting and you can put it into a speed setting or a competition speed if you follow their directions, but that will speed up your model from the factory settings. If you want a little bit more torque, you're trying to tow or something like that, and you want to leave the stock 550 motor, then probably best to just leave it as it comes out of the box. But if you want to rip it around on the pavement a little bit faster than it is, a few screws, swapping some things around, and you're good to go. You don't need anything extra. A nice option rather than including a second pinion or something like that. That's how they decided to handle that. As I mentioned, that's a 550 motor attached, and it's powered by a 1040 ESC. So Hobbywing made ESC. It's a lower model, kind of a basic RTR. Oftentimes you'll see 1060s as RTR ESCs. This one, the more basic 1040, which is still fine. It does have a sealed receiver box, so all of your radio equipment goes into that. It does come with a 3-channel radio as well. It's not using 3 channels out of the box, just 2, steering and throttle. But if you wanted to add another function, like some sort of light controller, that might be an easy one to add on there. I haven't done that to see exactly how that channel 3 functions, but pretty standard as far as 3 channels go. It should be able to handle that without any problem. Steering servo up there, made by Savox, states that on the box. Basic steering servo. Again, if you're not doing trail crawling or anything with crazy heavy loads, that steering servo is probably going to be fine, just a little bit slow. The servo does have a servo saver on it, so if it takes a huge hit, big whack, something like that, it should help save itself so you don't blow up any gears that are inside. The battery sits in this battery box that's mid-mounted, just sits in the middle of the chassis. It sits up high. Center of gravity really isn't a concern with these vehicles, so they just put it in the easiest spot. It does come with a Dean's plug. So you are gonna want a Dean's battery, or you're gonna be, looking for an adapter or change that out depending on what batteries you run. I see less and less vehicles come with Dean's these days. This one, maybe a couple of others. So that's a personal preference thing. Not a huge deal to get a battery adapter or get a battery specifically for it. Battery box is pretty standard size. So most, stick size packs will fit in there just fine. You probably put a 5,000 milliamp pack in this and drive it for 3 hours. It would probably last you quite a long time. The shocks on these trucks always looked pretty decent. They've got an aluminum body to them and they've got an adjustable preload collar. These do appear to have a slight tint to the anodizing. It's not just a raw aluminum, but it doesn't also look like a dark gray or anything like that. So it's just a good look. The preload adjusters on this have a nice big finger grip size to them. So they're super easy to adjust. Trying to put a little more preload in it, try and get it to stand up a little taller. Of course, that's an option that you could easily pull off with these. I mentioned that these do have open differentials. So if you're not familiar with what that is, if one wheel is in a bind, the other wheel will end up spinning. or it'll also allow for easier turning. That's the biggest benefit. So you'll get this thing to steer over or steer in a tighter circle. And that might be handy because the steering radius on these axles is pretty low. It doesn't exactly crank that over, and that's because it does have dog bones front and rear. Universal shafts are available in their huge list of aftermarket available parts. It comes with this flyer which lists all kinds of things that I suppose are compatible with this vehicle, since it all came on this flyer here. Aluminum upgrades for all the different areas, drive shafts, dress up parts, tons and tons of options. Let me know what you guys think. Should we just pick up every option part that they offer and see if we can bolt them all on here? Maybe that sounds like a plan. I know they had the spiky wheel nut covers previously that were pretty awesome. One of my more favorite upgrades that CEN Racing offered. So we'll take a look at that, see what option parts they have, and maybe we'll do a follow-up video and just throw everything we can from CEN at this truck. The body itself, it does come with a separate instruction sheet covering the body assembly. And that's the grille, the LEDs, the mirrors, everything. Speaking of, this does come with molded side view mirrors, which you can't really see because mine unfortunately did come damaged. I have talked to CEN Racing though, and they did send me out some replacements for that. The mirrors on this are very small. They're very true to the era that this vehicle was designed for. So they do have a good chance of being damaged, as you can see, as mine did. When those replacements do arrive though, very simple instructions on how to get those replaced if you needed any instructions at all, because it's just like one screw per side. Couldn't be much easier than that. Now, the chassis also has these cross braces on the front and back side, both of which have a receiver. So you've got a receiver here underneath of the front bumper, and then you also have one there on the rear bumper. Rear bumper obviously makes sense. This vehicle commonly used for towing. I've also seen fifth wheel or gooseneck style mounts made for these trucks. The front one, I don't love the look of it, that it's hanging so far down below that bumper. The F450s had great big beefy front bumpers, and it kind of hid all that stuff. Even if they had the same cross members, which they did, those front bumpers really covered that up, made it not look so out of place. So I personally not a huge fan of that, but I'm sure that there's going to be some easy fixes, or the old Dremel could probably come into play pretty quickly and solve any concerns that you have. I thought about just flipping it upside down, but the sway bar mount is also integrated into that, so it was less of an option initially. Even with the sway bars, this thing still does have some flex to it. Being solid axle, you can get two fingers under that, and that's gonna have to get the job done. We covered the radio briefly before, 3-channel, which is nice to have a little bit of extra feature there. But beyond that, it is feeling a bit dated. It's not the nicest radio. I wish that maybe they would look at some other options for that. It does have endpoint adjustment and things like that, but it would be nice if we could have something a little bit nicer feel than the radio that they've been using for quite some time. That's a small gripe, but the radio is the thing that you're physically interacting with every time you use the model. So nicer radios sometimes can have some benefits there. Of course, you can always swap it out for one of your choosing, which is what many of us do, especially many of us that have lots and lots of RCs laying around. The windows on this body are transparent. They do have a light tint to them, but you can see through it. And that does mean that you can see inside of the body to the empty interior. But if you're one to build up your truck and kind of customize it to your liking, an interior inside of this cab would do a lot for the overall style. And with how large the cab is, the old school styling, I think there's a ton of options there to make this thing look great inside, whether it be, a super detailed, scale accurate, or something more custom feeling. Tons and tons of options. Great place to try and make the truck your own. The battery sits basically behind the back seat, so it doesn't interfere a ton, and the depth that the motor and transmission sits down into this really still gives you a ton of ability to play with the overall height of the inside of the body to try and make that look, feel, scale appropriate. The rear bed doesn't exactly afford the same privilege though, as there's not much depth to this, maybe just over a 1/4 inch of depth not a big surprise there. That's pretty much how truck bodies are, just based on the abilities of vacuum formed Lexan. That's just really what you end up with. But they did a great job on the pull of this body overall. Very small triangles here in the corner of the bed. That's usually something that you have to have on a Lexan body to try and keep the body vacuum forming well. And this one just minimizes that. It blends in pretty well. So just on those little details, I think they did a great job. Being that the style of this body is so much different from the F450s and F250s, before we wrap this video up, I'm gonna give you just some overall measurements of a number of these areas in case you're curious and would like to compare some things. Now, the wheelbase on this is exactly the same as previous. So 17.5 inches is the long wheelbase on this truck. Overall length of the body, not including that rear bumper, is right at, I'd call it 25 1/8. Not sure. The body, or the bed portion at least, from the back of the tailgate to the back of the cab here, we are about 10.5 inches. The cab from that same point to the base of the windshield, right at, call it 9 1/4. The body, or the interior width, let's see, the overall body width, right about 8 inches. And interior width, you're gonna be closer to 6 3/4. So height of the body overall, just a hair under 6 inches, I'd say. So in case you were looking for some overall dimensions, maybe you're comparing it to a custom project you have, or some parts, some details of some previous CENs, anything like that, hopefully that answers some of your questions. So with that, my next steps will be, well, first of all, changing out that Dean's plug to an XT60, and then it'll be ready to run for me. For me, it's rainy and nasty outside, and the only areas that I'd be driving this would be pretty much on pavement. So I think we can forego any running footage for now, as it would just be running around in circles anyway. So, but that's gonna do it for this one. If you guys wanna see all of the upgrades that CEN makes for this thing thrown at it, drop it in the comments below. Do you prefer the old school that this new Sicario, it's a hard name. Do you prefer the old school looks of the Sicario, or do you like the newer school stuff? You like those F450s and F250s? I did really like that orange F250. That was definitely one of my favorites. But this one also looks pretty good. Old school done right can look good. Let me know what you guys think. As always, thanks CEN Racing for sending this over to me. Much appreciated. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're not already. Hit the notification bell so you see the videos as soon as they get uploaded. As always, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.